While I was repairing my dad's Ford, he stood behind me with his phone and turned me into the family joke. By that evening, half my relatives were laughing at a video of me covered in grease, and my own father had posted it publicly with a caption calling his daughter a failure. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I packed my tools and drove away. 3 days later, those same people were blowing up my phone, begging me to undo what I had done. The funny part was that I hadn't really done anything to them. I had simply stopped behaving like the woman they thought they could humiliate forever. It began with an alternator. Dad's aging Ford refused to start, and Frank Morgan did what he always did whenever something mechanical failed. He called me. Not a repair shop, not roadside assistance. Me. My name is Kylie Morgan, and for years my family had treated my ability to repair things as some strange little personality defect rather than a skill. Dad never asked what I charged because he already knew the answer. Family didn't pay Kylie. Kylie showed up. Kylie fixed it. Kylie went home. That was the arrangement nobody had officially discussed, but everyone somehow understood. I had already worked that morning when Dad called. Still, I drove across town with my toolbox rattling in the trunk because a small, embarrassing part of me continued, hoping he might eventually see me differently. Maybe he would hand me lunch afterward. Maybe he would offer $20 for gas. Maybe he would simply look at the running engine and say, "Nice work, kid." Instead, he shoved a warm sports drink into my hand, told me the repair shouldn't take forever, and disappeared into the house while I opened the hood. Nearly 2 hours passed beneath a merciless afternoon sun. Sweat ran into my eyes. Grease coated my wrists. One stubborn bolt seemed determined to become part of the engine permanently. My shoulders burned from leaning over the compartment, but eventually I started making progress. That was when I noticed Dad standing on the porch. His phone was pointed at me. I assumed, ridiculously, that he might be filming because he was proud. Frank had never been good at compliments. Maybe recording me was his awkward version of one. I actually smiled toward the camera. 20 minutes later, I reached for my phone during a water break. The family group chat had erupted. There I was on video, bent over the Ford with my hair tied back, wiping sweat from my forehead with a dirty forearm. Underneath it, Dad had written something close to, "Look at this loser doing auto work for free." Then came the laughing emojis. Nathan responded first, joking that he had a toilet Kylie could scrub when she finished. Eric wondered why I had never pursued a real career. Josh added that maybe I could start charging people someday if I ever became good enough. Even Aunt Diane contributed one of those fake sweet comments that somehow hurt more than an insult. Kylie had always been such a helpful girl. I stared at the screen, feeling something inside me go strangely quiet. Then, my coworker sent me a screenshot. Dad had posted the same video publicly. This version was worse. His caption mocked how slowly I worked and called me his free mechanic failure. People I hadn't spoken to since school were commenting beneath it. Former classmates tagged one another. Someone remembered an embarrassing moment from gym class. People I barely knew were laughing because Frank had given them permission to. My father had taken 2 hours of unpaid work from his daughter and turned it into entertainment. I looked through the windshield toward the house. Dad was somewhere inside, probably sitting in his recliner while I finished saving him hundreds of dollars. I closed my toolbox. Then I lowered the Ford's hood, and I left. No confrontation, no dramatic speech. I didn't give him the satisfaction of watching me cry or yell. I drove to my boyfriend Ethan's apartment and asked whether I could stay there for the night. He saw my face and didn't push for details. He just handed me a clean towel, ordered dinner, and let me sit silently on his couch until I finally told him what happened. Ethan wanted to call Dad himself. I told him not to. Something had changed, and I needed to understand what it was before anybody interfered. For 2 days, I ignored the family. By the third morning, my phone looked possessed. 30 missed calls, messages from cousins who had been laughing 48 hours earlier, a voicemail from Mom crying so hard I could barely understand her, another from Dad that began controlled and ended with him shouting my name. Uncle Raymond sent the strangest message of all. "Kylie, whatever you did, fix it immediately. I read that sentence several times. They thought I had snapped. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment long before Dad raised his phone on that porch. Cars had stopped being a hobby years ago. Quietly, after work and on weekends, I had been buying neglected vehicles, repairing them, and reselling them. First one car, then another. Then enough that the money stopped looking like pocket change. I registered an LLC without telling my family. I built relationships with parts suppliers. I saved aggressively. Most importantly, I had been negotiating with the owner of a small neighborhood garage who wanted to retire. 2 weeks before Dad's alternator died, we had agreed on terms. I was about to own a repair business. Leaving Dad's driveway didn't destroy my plans. It accelerated them. That evening, I met the owner at the garage and asked whether we could complete the transfer earlier than planned. He looked at me for a long second, then smiled, and said he had been waiting to see whether I was serious enough to take the leap. We stayed late handling paperwork. When I finally walked outside, I had the keys in my hand. 3 days after Dad's Facebook post, I recorded my own video. Behind me was a spotless work bay, rows of tools, newly painted walls, and a bright red Mustang lifted several feet above the floor. I faced the camera without anger. I explained that some people might have seen a video of me repairing my father's car for free. Yes, I had helped him. No, he hadn't paid me. Then I stepped sideways and let the camera capture the entire garage. "This is what I do," I said, "and now this place belongs to me." Then I showed the sign, Free Labor Auto. I had renamed the business 2 days earlier. "Thanks for the marketing idea, Dad." The internet did the rest. Within 24 hours, the post spread farther than anything Dad had ever uploaded. Mechanics shared it. Women in trades shared it. Customers started messaging for appointments. A local reporter contacted the shop. Dad called 7 times before lunch. Then the cousins began transforming. Josh suddenly claimed his joke had been harmless. Nathan reposted my video with a congratulations message. Eric covered my comments with fire emojis as though he had been cheering for me from the beginning. Uncle Raymond even suggested hosting some ridiculous family car day at my garage. I ignored all of them. Then Dad appeared at the shop. I was underneath a customer's Civic when I heard pounding against the front glass. Through the windshield, I saw Frank standing outside furious. The moment he entered, he skipped hello entirely. "You embarrassed me." That was his opening sentence. Not times I'm sorry. Not times I shouldn't have posted that. He accused me of humiliating him, making the family look bad, creating unnecessary internet drama. Then, with breathtaking confidence, he said something I still remember word for word in meaning, even if I wish I didn't. "You wouldn't have any of this without me." I laughed. Dad didn't. He wanted my video removed. Better yet, he wanted another one. Posted a new version where I explained that his teasing had motivated me and thanked him for pushing me toward success. "For what?" I asked. "Calling your daughter a loser?" His face hardened. He said families joked. Families forgave. Families didn't expose one another publicly. That was when I understood the rule. He could humiliate me publicly. I was only forbidden from answering publicly. So that night, I went home, opened my laptop, and created a folder. Not just the Facebook post. Everything. Screenshots, group chat messages, voicemails, old recordings, years of small humiliations I had convinced myself weren't important enough to remember. And while those files filled the screen one after another, I realized Dad had made one enormous mistake. He thought this story started with an alternator. It didn't. The alternator was simply the first time I stopped pretending the rest of it had never happened. The folder kept growing until nearly 3 in the morning. At first, I was only collecting material connected to Dad's Facebook post, but once I started searching old messages, I realized how much of my life had been organized around pretending his cruelty was harmless. There were screenshots from birthdays, where he mocked the clothes I wore, recordings from family gatherings where he called my work cute because apparently a woman turning a wrench could never be anything more than a phase, and messages from relatives laughing along because Frank Morgan had always known how to turn humiliation into entertainment. I found an old video from my college graduation where Dad had arrived drunk enough to heckle when my name was called. I found another message from years later, sent after he met Daniel, a boyfriend I dated before Ethan, where Dad told him I was too emotional for a guy who wanted a serious woman. Daniel had shown it to me because he thought I should know. Back then, I had apologized for Dad. Sitting there now, watching the pattern assemble itself across the screen, I finally understood how often I had protected the person hurting me. The next video I posted was different from the first. I didn't stand inside the garage smiling beside a Mustang. I sat at my desk after closing time, the lights behind me dim except for one bay where a half-restored Camaro waited for morning. I spoke slowly. I showed the family chat screenshots, the Facebook caption, the cousins laughing, Dad's voicemail demanding that I repair the embarrassment I had supposedly caused. Then I went backward. Graduation. Birthdays. Holidays. Comments about my relationships. Little humiliations Dad had scattered through my life because none seemed serious enough by itself to justify walking away. I blurred enough names to keep the focus where it belonged. At the end, I told people I wasn't asking them to hate my father. I wasn't asking strangers to punish anyone. I was simply done allowing my family to tell a story where Dad was joking, and I was too sensitive to understand the joke. "I'm not ashamed of fixing cars," I said. "I'm ashamed I spent this long, believing I had to earn basic respect from people who already knew they were hurting me." That video changed everything. The first one had been satisfying a daughter turning an insult into a business name. This one made people angry. Mechanics from other states shared it. Women who worked in welding, construction, trucking, and automotive repair sent messages telling me they recognized the way competence could become something relatives mocked when it came from the wrong person. Then, people completely outside the trade started sharing it. A therapist discussed the difference between teasing and repeated humiliation. A nonprofit supporting adults from emotionally abusive homes reposted the clip. A small automotive podcast invited me on. Within days, 2 tool companies and an auto parts supplier contacted Free Labor Auto about partnerships. Customers arrived wearing homemade shirts with the shop name written across the front. Ethan joked that Dad had accidentally created the most effective marketing campaign in town. I laughed, but underneath the excitement, I felt uneasy. Attention had turned my private family history into something enormous, and I knew Frank well enough to understand that he would never watch someone else control the spotlight. The family chat became a civil war. Josh suddenly insisted he had always respected my mechanical skills. Eric said everyone had gone too far but accused me of making the situation too public, as if Dad's original Facebook video had somehow been private. Nathan sent me a childhood photograph of the 2 of us sitting beside a plastic toy car and asked whether I was seriously willing to throw away an entire family over one stupid joke. Aunt Diane wrote 3 paragraphs about forgiveness. Uncle Raymond said success was making me arrogant. I didn't answer any of them. Then Mom texted me something that cut through all the noise. "Your father is in the hospital. Panic attack. They thought it was his heart. Are you happy now?" I stared at the message until the words blurred. Even now, when Dad suffered consequences from his own behavior, somehow the emotional invoice had been addressed to me. For 2 days I fought the instinct to rush to the hospital. Ethan told me I didn't owe anyone an immediate reaction, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. If Dad really had suffered something serious, I needed to know, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I didn't want my anger turning me into someone incapable of caring whether another person lived or died. So I drove to the hospital alone. I didn't call Mom. I parked across from a side entrance and waited. Less than 40 minutes later, Dad appeared. He was sitting in a wheelchair, but nothing else matched the catastrophic picture Mom had painted. No oxygen, no monitors, no weakness. He wore his usual windbreaker and held a cigarette between 2 fingers while scrolling on his phone. Mom stood beside him, looking exhausted rather than frightened. Dad finished smoking, handed her the cigarette butt, and returned inside. It looked less like a medical crisis than an actor stepping outside during intermission. I entered through another door and approached a nurse near the elevators, claiming I was a relative trying to understand whether Dad was still being treated. She couldn't give me private medical details, but what she said was enough. He had presented with anxiety-related symptoms, had been medically cleared, and was no longer receiving cardiac treatment. I walked back outside without visiting him. That night, Frank called. "For reasons I still can't fully explain," I answered. His voice sounded perfectly normal. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask whether I was okay. Instead, he complimented the production quality of my video and told me I was finally thinking like a businesswoman. Then his voice brightened. "Kylie, people are paying attention now. We could actually do something with this." I didn't understand until he explained it. A local television station, Channel 4, had contacted him. They were interested in the family conflict because my videos were circulating locally. Dad had already spoken with someone there and pitched what he called a father-daughter redemption story. According to him, viewers didn't want endless negativity. They wanted healing. They wanted a stubborn old father admitting he had pushed his talented daughter too hard, and a successful daughter realizing that beneath all the mistakes, he had always believed in her. Dad had already sent the station old photographs from my childhood. He even mentioned one from my 10th birthday, where he was helping me hold a wrench beside his truck. "That's perfect television," he said. "People love seeing where somebody started." I asked why he imagined I would participate. His answer came immediately. "Because you're not stupid. Exposure like this could double your business." Something inside me went cold. Dad hadn't misunderstood anything. He understood perfectly. He simply believed every emotion had a market value. My anger could become publicity. His cruelty could become character development. My childhood photographs could become promotional material. Before hanging up, he told me we should stop fighting the momentum and ride it together. The next morning, I discovered he had already started without me. He created an Instagram and TikTok account with a name resembling Time's The Real Free Labor Dad. His first video showed him sitting in his truck holding one of my childhood wrenches. He explained that his daughter considered him the villain, but every successful person needed someone willing to push them. He admitted his delivery had sometimes been harsh, while insisting his intentions had always been love. "Kylie was sensitive," he told the camera, smiling sadly. "But she was gifted. I knew that before she did." The account grew quickly because controversy rewards anyone willing to feed it. Dad posted childhood pictures, old garage footage, stories about teaching me to use tools, and dramatic videos standing outside his own garage implying that this was where everything began. In one, he said he had raised his daughter tough enough to survive a world that wouldn't go easy on her. Hundreds of strangers congratulated him for being an old-school father. Others attacked him. Dad responded to everyone because both hatred and praise increased engagement. Customers at my shop became confused. One man asked whether Frank would be available for pictures. Another woman called asking whether the father-daughter television special had already been scheduled. My business name, my face, and my history were becoming accessories in Dad's new identity. He had spent years mocking what I built, and now he wanted ownership because strangers finally valued it. I could have posted another angry response. Instead, I stopped reacting. Every time Dad called, I recorded the conversation where legally permitted and saved every voicemail he willingly left me. Every message went into the folder. Every suggestion about turning our conflict into merchandise or interviews was preserved. Jenna, my cousin on Mom's side, and one of the few relatives who had quietly checked on me without asking for anything, began watching Dad's accounts too. Ethan worried that letting Frank continue would only make things worse, but I told him that was exactly what I needed. Dad believed silence meant surrender. The longer I said nothing, the more comfortable he became revealing what he actually wanted. For an entire week, I watched him construct a heroic version of himself. He posted a video claiming the hospital incident had helped him rethink fatherhood, even though he still hadn't apologized privately. He hinted that Channel 4 wanted both sides. He began calling followers his garage family. One evening, he left me a voicemail excitedly discussing possible sponsorship packages if the television interview performed well. That was when I knew I had enough. I sent him one short text. "I've been thinking about Channel 4. Maybe we should talk before I decide." His reply arrived less than 2 minutes later. All capital letters. 3 exclamation marks. He called me champ and said he had ideas prepared. I told him to meet me at Free Labor Auto early Saturday morning before opening. Just the two of us. No cameras, no family. Off the record. Dad agreed immediately. What Frank didn't know was that nothing about Saturday morning would be off the record. He didn't know Jenna had been talking to him from a separate number for days, pretending she understood his side and encouraging him to explain himself more openly. He didn't know some of those conversations had produced admissions even I hadn't expected. He didn't know Marcus, the longtime friend who helped me register my LLC months earlier, had already been inside my office testing cameras and audio. And he definitely didn't know that the chair I planned to place across from my desk would have a legal document waiting on it. For the first time since Dad filmed me beneath that Ford hood, I wasn't waiting to see what he would do next. I already knew. And this time, I was making sure everyone else could see it too. Saturday morning arrived, with the kind of silence that makes every small sound feel deliberate. I reached Free Labor Auto before sunrise, made coffee I never drank, and checked the office twice, even though Marcus had already tested everything the night before. The legal agreement sat inside a plain folder on the chair opposite my desk. It had been drafted by a lawyer Marcus knew and written as simply as possible. Frank Morgan could not use my name, image, business, private history, childhood photographs, or personal story and advertisements, interviews, social media content, or merchandise without written permission. He could not enter the shop unless invited. If he wanted a relationship with his daughter, it would have to exist privately instead of as content. Jenna was already in the back office, and Marcus sat beside her with his phone connected to the shop's network. Ethan had offered to stay too, but I told him no. This had started between Dad and me. I needed Frank to speak freely. Without another man in the room, he could accuse of controlling me. Dad arrived 15 minutes early. Of course he did. Frank only cared about punctuality when he believed something important was about to happen for him. Through the front windows, I watched him climb out of his truck wearing a tucked-in polo, clean jeans, polished shoes, and what looked suspiciously like newly whitened teeth. He carried a leather notebook beneath one arm. When I unlocked the door, he walked in smiling broadly and looked around the garage as though he were touring property he had invested in. "Look at this place," he said. "My girl really did it." That sentence would have meant everything to me years earlier. Now it sounded rehearsed. He asked whether Channel 4 had given me a date yet. I pointed toward the office and told him we needed to talk first. He noticed the folder immediately. He sat down, opened it, and read in silence. His expression changed line by line. The smile disappeared first, then the relaxed shoulders. By the time he reached the section banning him from using Free Labor Auto in his content, his jaw was tight. He looked up and laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You're seriously trying to cut your own father out of the biggest moment of your life?" I told him I wasn't cutting him out of anything. I was separating my life from his marketing strategy. He pushed the agreement away and told me I was being dramatic again. He said the public wanted us together. Channel 4 wanted us together, and apparently even several businesses had contacted him about possible father-daughter campaigns. That was the first I had heard of those. He smiled like he had accidentally revealed a winning card too early. I asked whether he had already committed to anything using my name. Frank leaned back and said I should stop thinking like an angry daughter and start thinking like a business owner. Then he admitted Channel 4 had interviewed him the previous afternoon. He had described me as emotionally unstable, overwhelmed by sudden attention, and unable to separate childhood resentment from reality. He told them he worried success was changing Kylie. I stared at him until he finally smirked. "You think I don't understand how this works?" he said. "The first person who looks hurt wins." For a few seconds I couldn't speak. Then I pointed toward the small Bluetooth speaker on the shelf behind him. Its indicator light was blinking. Dad followed my finger, stared at it, and then slowly looked back at me. "Are you recording me?" "Yes," I said. "And not just today." That was when the mask came off. Dad stood so quickly the chair scraped backward across the floor. He called me he called me paranoid, manipulative, ungrateful. He demanded to know how long I had been recording him. I told him I had saved every voicemail, every conversation where he tried to turn our conflict into a brand, every suggestion that we manufacture reconciliation because viewers would like it. I had backups, dates, screenshots, copies in cloud storage. His voice rose until he was almost shouting. He said I was becoming a snake, that success had poisoned me, that I was destroying my own family for attention. Then, almost without thinking, he gave me exactly what I had been waiting for. "You really think the hospital thing was some crime?" he snapped. "I needed people to back off. Your mother said sympathy might calm things down." The back office door opened. Dad froze. Jenna stepped out first. Marcus followed with his phone held upright. Frank's eyes moved from one face to the other, and for the first time since I had known him, my father seemed unable to invent a response quickly enough. Jenna told him she had been the person messaging him from the account he believed belonged to a supporter. She had spent days encouraging him to explain how unfairly I had treated him, and Frank had happily explained everything. She had his voice message admitting that the hospital visit had become useful because people were feeling sorry for him. She had texts where he discussed using the panic episode to soften public opinion. Marcus raised his phone slightly. "And people have been listening to this conversation from the beginning." Dad went white. Marcus's live stream already had thousands of viewers, and the number was climbing fast. Frank immediately started shouting that it was a setup. He accused Jenna of betraying the family and Marcus of illegally invading a private conversation. He threatened lawsuits, police, reporters, anyone whose title sounded powerful enough to scare us. Then he turned toward me and said Mom would never forgive me. Neither would my aunts, my cousins, or anyone who understood loyalty. I remember looking at him and realizing that even then he wasn't apologizing. He was still searching for a consequence strong enough to make me submit. When none appeared, he grabbed his notebook and stormed out, slamming the glass door so hard, one of the framed certificates on the wall shifted crooked. Nobody celebrated after he left. That surprised me. I had imagined feeling victorious once Dad finally exposed himself publicly, but instead the garage felt hollow. Marcus ended the stream. Jenna sat beside me while I copied everything onto another drive. She finally said, "They'll blame you before they admit he did this." By Monday, she was proven right. Aunt Diane accused me of humiliating the Morgan family. Uncle Raymond said secretly recording conversations was worse than anything Dad had posted. Nathan, who had been apologizing days earlier, now told me I had crossed a line. Suddenly, everyone who had laughed beneath Dad's original video had developed passionate opinions about privacy, dignity, and forgiveness. I stopped answering after the 5th message. Channel 4 called that afternoon. I expected damage control or perhaps a request for comment about Dad's interview. Instead, the producer told me they had seen Marcus's stream. The father-daughter reconciliation segment was canceled. They no longer trusted Frank's version of events, and they did not want to reward an obviously manufactured redemption story. Then she surprised me. The station still wanted to profile Free Labor Auto, but without Dad. Their new angle would focus on small business owners who had survived destructive family dynamics and built independent lives. No surprise reunion. No emotional ambush. No Frank sitting beside me pretending we had healed because a camera was present. I told her I would consider it. That evening, I looked at my phone and saw more than 30 missed calls. Relatives, unknown numbers, people from Dad's online following. Even a local pastor left a voicemail telling me reconciliation was the godly thing to pursue. I realized I had won control of the public story but still had no control over my own silence. So the next morning, I walked into a phone store and changed my number. I didn't transfer the old contacts. I didn't preserve the family group chat. I wrote down the handful of people I actually wanted in my life: Ethan, Jenna, Marcus, a few friends, employees, suppliers, and started again. Then I blocked Dad everywhere else. No final message. No speech explaining why. I had spent enough years explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. That night, Ethan met me outside the shop after closing. The permanent sign had finally been installed above the entrance. Free Labor Auto, clean letters glowing beneath the parking lot lights. I stood there for a moment, thinking about Dad's Ford. That brutal afternoon sun, the grease on my arms, and the ridiculous little smile I had given his camera because I had mistaken humiliation for pride. Ethan slipped his hand into mine, but didn't interrupt. I took one photograph of the building and posted it to the business page with a single sentence: "Built out of disrespect. Running on peace." Then I disabled the comments and put my phone away. The next morning, I unlocked the garage before sunrise. There were cars waiting, invoices on the desk, parts arriving before lunch, and work that belonged entirely to me. Nobody called asking me to fix the family. Nobody demanded an apology. Nobody laughed through a phone screen while I worked for free. For the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like ownership. Dad had once thought the funniest thing about me was that I kept repairing what other people broke without asking for anything in return. Maybe he had been right about one part of that. I had spent years repairing damage that was never mine to fix. I just finally learned when to put the tools down.